Hello and welcome to the Green Business Podcast where we meet exciting climate entrepreneurs. I am your host, Bharti. Hydrogen is the most debated amongst green fuels because we don't know whether it is green. We also don't know how long it is going to take for it to become affordable for all of us. To answer all these questions, I have the perfect hydrogen entrepreneur today. He is Santosh from Umagine. They are a consulting firm that works with state governments and corporates and helps them with their hydrogen strategy. You Imagine also has ambitious plans of making hydrogen fuel cells, which is basically a battery that converts hydrogen into electricity. Welcome to the show, Santosh. So excited to have you.
Thank you very much, Bharti, and thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Yeah.
So Santosh, you worked with in the oil and gas industry, and you were also a consultant to these industries. When did you exactly switch side, and how did you imagine happen?
So I think Imagine happened officially in 2019.
Hmm.
That's when we started Imagine September 2019 approximately in the Netherlands. But the switch, actually, the thought came in, I would say, the time when I was already at Shell. So I was in Shell from
Hmm.
2012 to 2018, uh,
Hmm.
exploring different things within, let's say, the oil and gas field, primarily
Hmm.
downstream. So I was looking into more, let's say, gas to liquids, as well as working in a refinery, looking into hydrogen manufacturing. So hydrogen, let's say the stint with hydrogen started way back in 2012 itself. So from the beginning of my career, I've been working in hydrogen in that sense. And there's no green hydrogen at that point. It was
Hmm.
gray and even black to some
Yeah.
extent. But yeah, I mean that's what I was doing. But I'd say like when I was at Shell and around I'd say 2016. A lot of discussions in the open forum started around climate change, and then and of course, as a technocrat, you do understand, it is something there, and the urgency has been increasing with time.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, what can we do, right? Shell was also doing some things, but you know, for the lack of words, it was not very impressive, right?
Hmm.
It's much better now, but still, if you look at what is the percentage of revenue they or the percentage of capital expenditure which goes into green energy projects, it's still kind of a minute piece. So I thought, fine. Perhaps I could leave Shell, look at other opportunities to transition into the sustainability domain, right? So that's why I joined McKinsey. And unfortunately, what I did there was even worse. At least in Shell, I was working with gas plants and hydrogen, but then in McKinsey, I was advising all these refineries how to improve their margins. So a lot of carbon dioxide was on my hands. If you may. So, and then like around 2018 as well. At that point, we had moved into a new house in the Netherlands, and it was very clear that we wanted to kind of actually on
Hmm.
ourselves, start ourselves
Hmm.
on the sustainability space. So we had put in like 15 odd solar panels. We had bought an electric car back in 2018 itself, Hyundai Ioniq, one of the first few electric cars even in the Netherlands, and started to kind of do things ourselves, what could make sense, right? So.
Hmm.
So at the end of like let's say within McKinsey very quickly realized that this is not nothing is going to happen here as well.
Hmm.
Of course there was sustainability practice, but again it was
Yeah.
advising these oil and gas. It's the same ratio of revenue
Right.
and spending, and eventually what's going to sustainability. So finally decided, let's say let's start on our own, right? That was like 2018. Sorry, that was 2019, right? And it was like a expecting very large corporates to do something. I've tried, but I don't see much
Hmm.
happening there. So let me at least try to affect the change myself,
Okay.
and then at least that's the basic you could do, right? Like change yourself before trying to expect to change the world. So that's how we started. First couple of years we focused on actually rooftop solar and electric vehicle charging
Hmm.
infrastructure. So that was also in the Netherlands. We were a pure, I would say, a full service EPC company. We had our own installers, we had our own teams, and we were primarily catering to the B2C market,
Hmm.
and some small scale B2B projects as well. But I remember it was like about 1.5 years where every day I used to visit 4 to 5 Dutch family homes sitting in their living rooms and trying to convince them on why they should buy solar panels from us, or why they should buy solar panels in the first place. So it was a very interesting, very exciting time. I mean, I should honestly say. And then like slowly when we started with solar, a lot of these people who were putting in solar also started to move towards electric vehicles, and they were like, can you also install an EV charger? And I'm like, okay, let's figure it out. It didn't look very complicated, at least from an EPC perspective, right? So we also started to do that, and yeah, that's how the start was, I would say. Yeah.
And then you moved to India and you started consulting people on hydrogen.
Yeah, so basically, like, the to some extent, the trigger point happened in the Netherlands itself, right? Say after your, I had I did a rough calculation. I would have been in 500 different Dutch homes trying to explain solar panels. When I started, I used to say, you know what, your load is 5 kilowatt. You should install a 7 kilowatt system. Then after a couple of months, it became okay. You should do 5. Then after a couple of months, you know what, you should install 3 kilowatt. That's more than enough, right? Because you're actually going to use the power directly. And then there was a day, I still remember very clearly, when this guy was really asking me about, how much should I install? And I was like, you know what, your solar panels are made in China, which is going to be transported with heavy fuel oil ships all the way from Shanghai to Rotterdam, then with diesel trucks to warehouses, then with diesel buses to your home. And you get like 2.5, 3 hours per day of sunlight on an average. The carbon return of solar panels
it's not worth it.
is like 8 years or something. And then after 10 years, you're going to change your solar panels. At that point, I'm like, you know what, this doesn't make sense. I mean, it sounds very stupid, right? Like, this is something which you would know on the day one, but still, right? The realization comes only with time. And so we started slowly moving towards hydrogen. We planned a transition journey. In fact, we started with hydrogen in the Netherlands itself, but then kind of end of 2021 realized that the opportunity is much, much bigger in India. And National Green Hydrogen Mission was launched in, I think, August of 2021. And so thought, okay, fine, let's take the plunge, let's move back. 11 years in Europe, I mean, it was a long time, of course. I mean, I was very much integrated into the Dutch culture, honestly. I still miss Netherlands a lot. But, parents were getting older, dad had retired already, and thought, why not build it in India? I mean, how difficult could it be? I mean, until now, but let's talk about it later. But yeah, I mean, moved back. And initially thought, consulting is something which we could start with, because consulting was always going to be let's say a driver to do more things, different things in the future. Because with consulting, you could do more acquisition, you could understand the market, and then I had a consulting background as well, so I thought, why not? Because I mean, to be honest, even now the only people who are earning with hydrogen is either consultants or conference organizers. Right? So we thought, okay, fine, let's start. And then we were fortunate enough to get some assignments on the government side. We were writing the policy for Gujarat. Then a lot of private assignments helping companies with strategy, roadmap around green hydrogen. And then slowly we got into projects. We started doing some, let's say, engineering work, system integration work for live projects on hydrogen microgrids. And in the, let's say, course of all this, realized that hydrogen fuel cells is a very, very big wide space in India, where everybody is running after electrolyzers, and fuel cells is something which we can pick up. And I would say for the past 1 year, we have been developing our own technology on the hydrogen fuel cells, specifically for stationary power generation and drone applications. And basically planning to scale that up and slowly, become a more technology company rather than a consulting company.
Okay, wonderful. We'll get to fuel cells later. That's too complicated for now. So let's start with green hydrogen. So is there a definition of green hydrogen? Is there an international definition and then an Indian definition?
Yeah, so green hydrogen itself, right? I mean, as the name suggests, it should be hydrogen, which should be green. There is no green in hydrogen. Hydrogen is colorless. And basically it defines what is the color of hydrogen is basically defined by two things. One is the carbon intensity of hydrogen, which means how much kilograms of carbon dioxide do you do you emit while producing a single kilo of hydrogen, right?
Okay.
So, for example, the incumbent hydrogen, so a lot of hydrogen, most of the hydrogen is made from natural gas. That is called gray hydrogen because it is like, dark in the sense of
Right.
more carbon dioxide, right? So it emits around 11 to 12 kgs of CO2 per kg of hydrogen produced. Then there is even, people don't talk about it, but then there is hydrogen which could be emitted from coal, right? From process of coal to hydrogen process. It's even worse than 11. And then there is a range. And then when you talk about green hydrogen, it is basically hydrogen which is generated through different sources. It could be electrolysis, where you split water into hydrogen or oxygen, or it could be biomass, where you convert biomass into hydrogen. So green hydrogen is when, let's say, you use one of these processes, and in the course of it, you achieve a certain carbon emissions. So the definition of green hydrogen is not a scientific one, but a regulatory / political one, right? For example, in Europe, green hydrogen is when you produce, let's say, hydrogen with a carbon intensity of less than 4 approximately kg hydrogen CO2 per kg CO hydrogen. And this is primarily coming from the fact that they're looking at a 70% reduction compared to the current rates of hydrogen production, right? So, and then the number 4 is like quite, even Europe, in UK it's about 3.4 to 4, Australia also. So number of these countries, it's looking at about that 3.4 to 4 range. When you talk about US, they have not defined it completely yet, but then the incentives which they are going to shell out for green hydrogen is going to be dependent on the carbon intensity. So if you produce hydrogen with 0.45, not 4, but 0.45, that's when you get $3 per kg subsidy, right? So it's kind of, when it comes to India, the Indian definition of green hydrogen is based on 2 kg of CO2 per kg of hydrogen, which prima facie sounds aggressive than Europe, but then the devil is in the details. I mean, there are a lot of things which still yet to be clarified on, how that too will be calculated.
Okay, fine. And so India has big plans, right? We have this green hydrogen mission, and you came to India because green hydrogen mission was there. So why, and India is projecting itself as a big hydrogen hub. We are going to be exporting hydrogen. So what are our inherent advantages in hydrogen?
So when it comes to hydrogen, right, if you talk about the two kind of hydrogen, one is hydrogen made with water, right, splitting of water, and the other one is hydrogen made via biomass, right? So and then when you're talking about splitting of water, you're talking about renewable energy, right? Only when the electricity which you need comes from renewable energy. Now, the major advantage which India has is that it has a very good potential of renewable energy, right, across both solar and wind assets, right? So, and there's a lot of land, and a lot of solar and a lot of wind could be installed. And when I talk about very good potential, that also translates to some of the lowest cost of electricity from renewable sources, right? And considering the fact that electricity contributes close to 70% of the total cost of hydrogen originating from water electrolysis, the lower the cost of electricity, much more competitive. So in that case, India is one of the destinations where a lot of hydrogen could be produced, right? And that's why it is quite attractive from a perspective of, let's say, both export as well as internal use, right? Now, of course, the same definition kind of holds for, let's say, same reasoning holds for several different, let's say, countries like Australia or North Africa or Middle East, of course. So that's kind of universal. But then why hydrogen in India? From my perspective, personally, from Umagine's perspective, we think of it as not only from the renewable side, but we are looking at it from an energy independence, energy security side, right? Hydrogen could be a vector where we are not dependent on any other country to produce it and use it locally for both for different applications, which we'll come to shortly. So that is like that is what we see as the primary value driver. Of course, exports could be interesting, but it need not necessarily be as important.
Do we trade in, may not be green, but do we trade in hydrogen at all as of now? Are there industries that use it, and would they? So when we say it is useful for India, we are assuming that existing industries as well as new industries will transition to it, right?
Right, right. So see, hydrogen currently, like very simply put, 95% of the hydrogen is used in either refineries or in the production of ammonia, and ammonia is subsequently used for the production of urea or other
Yeah.
fertilizers as well as certain chemicals, right? So these two applications together contributes plus a small some minor applications contribute to like close to 6.5 million tons of hydrogen on an annual basis in India and about 95 million tons globally, right? So India except so the hydrogen industry is already there, right? I mean, of course, these
Yeah.
are conventional industries like
Yeah.
refineries and fertilizers. But where hydrogen actually is going to be relevant is for the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, right? So these are industries and different industries and certain mobility sectors which are very hard to decarbonize, specifically using electrification, right? So these are the sectors which is a whole range, right, from steel, cement, refineries, fertilizers, chemicals, and a lot of high-grade heat industries where natural gas is used or coal is used, as well as some heavy mobility industries. So
Right.
for all these industries, hydrogen is going to play a very important role. So when you're talking about the growth of hydrogen, it is going to be driven by these newer applications of hydrogen rather than the existing applications.
Okay, and it seems to me like a manufacturing play, right? People like Reliance, Adani, they are going to be, or all these big companies, maybe Tata Chemicals, they are going to be the most important players, right? They are going to be manufacturing the hydrogen. So where will the startups have a role in this?
Right. So the first part of your question is that it's actually going to be it's going to be like, so hydrogen production is like two parts, right? There's a centralized hydrogen production and there's also going to be distributed hydrogen production. When we talk about centralized hydrogen production, of course, the names which you mentioned are going to play an important role. But in addition to that, hydrogen is seen as a forward integration for all the renewable energy developers, right? So all the Renews, the Acmes, and the Green Codes and the Avadas and O2 powers of the world, they are looking at, selling RE power at 2.5 tariff is very challenging. So let's add hydrogen to it, and you sell it as an upside, right? So that is a forward integration play where all these renewable energy developers are looking at. So that is where the centralized hydrogen production is going to come up. However, there is a fairly big decentralized play as well, right? Specifically when you're talking about biomass to hydrogen production kind of facilities, just think of all the municipal waste, let's say corporations, right? So corporations which are processing municipal waste, all these could produce hydrogen in a distributed way, and that hydrogen could be used to power their, let's say, fuel trucks and garbage trucks and stuff like that. So a lot of distributed hydrogen would come up. Now, coming to the second question, startups have multiple roles in this, right? The biggest role which you have is on the technology side, right? The hydrogen so production of hydrogen, storage, transportation, and applications of hydrogen. All the technologies, some of them are, of course, developed and maybe have a very high TRL, but still there is a lot of room for improvement, right? When I talk about 70% of hydrogen cost coming from electricity, that's because of the efficiency of the electrolyzers. Right? Now, if you improve your efficiency of the electrolyzers, things can change. Then the current electrolyzers, a lot of them are made abroad, right? A lot of them could be made in India. So when it comes to startups, technology is a very big play. Cost, indigenization, alternative, forms of, hydrogen storage. So there is a lot which can be done on the technology front. But then a lot could be done also on the services front, right? I mean, a lot of these, let's say, you need to ensure that the hydrogen is green, right? So there could be certification play over there. And then once there is a lot of distributed as well as centralized production, a lot of industries using it, then there's going to be services and logistics as well, which will be regional as well as. And then when it comes to that, say, marketplaces can come up, right? Looking into hydrogen. So there are a number of these areas where, startups can play a role. If you can think about it, let's say most of the companies, the bigger names in hydrogen, right? Except for one or two, all of them are less than 3-4 years old, right? I mean, like globally, both fuel cells as well as electrolyzers, so less than 5 years old. So it's an industry currently run primarily by startups. from the technology front at least. Yeah.
And at some level, they will either collaborate with or get acquired by these big guys. And then that's how.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about what Umagine is doing here. So you said you are planning to make hydrogen fuel cells. Tell us more on that.
Sure. So fuel cells is basically an falls under the application space of hydrogen, right? So which is a reverse of electrolyzer, where you feed in hydrogen and oxygen in the form of air, and you convert that into electricity and water, right? So water is basically, so in this process there is no carbon emissions, right? So that's why it's clean and green and everything, right? As long as the hydrogen is clean, obviously. So green. So on the fuel cells front, there are a range of applications where fuel cells play a role. There are power applications, stationary power applications, which will be small scale, right? So you're talking about portable power. You can just think of even mobile chargers, right? I mean, there are actually some companies who have built mobile chargers based on hydrogen. You're talking about maybe slightly bigger. So anywhere where you're talking about power where you don't take from the grid, right? Or you either you don't have it or you need power on the go, which could be stationary, which could be mobility, right? It could be, let's say, even backup power, right? So that's like the entire range of applications for fuel cells.
Right.
So what we are specifically looking at is not mobility fuel cells, but primarily stationary power applications. So so one of our very critical and important thesis is that, India, although every corner of India is electrified, there is still a huge problem when it comes to peak power and load shedding, right? So across India, even in the bigger cities, you have diesel generator sets everywhere. You have large-scale grids who have problems when it comes to peaking power. So for all these applications, we are building fuel cells. Now, the fuel cells which we are building will be, of course, very much modular and stackable in nature, which could be used, for example, for a, let's say, an industrial or a residential complex, which could be like 10, 25, 30 kilowatt kind of systems. The same thing can be stacked up to a 250 or a 300 kilowatt systems in a data center, right? Or a megawatt scale system in a data center as a backup. Or it could be also stacked up to a few tens of megawatts for providing backup power or for grid services using fuel cells. So that is, let's say, the bigger plan which we have. And we see that opportunity to be quite big. I mean, both from a problem standpoint as well as from a revenue standpoint, right? As the market stands right now. Of course, we are early, but the good thing is that, it will take another couple of years for the hydrogen cost and the prices and also the hydrogen production facilities to come up. So in these years, this time will also help us with maturing our product beyond what it is right now. So we are actually already installing our fuel cells in some of our projects. So it's all about backward integration, more indigenization, and scaling it up so that we can reduce the cost. So that's where the focus is going to be for the next couple of years. Yeah.
Okay. So a fuel cell will have various things. It will have a membrane, and there is a membrane, there is a catalyst, there is a hardware. So you are making some of these components and buying the rest and aggregating it. You are a fuel cell OEM.
So we are.
OEM? Yeah.
So we. I mean, I would say we are a fuel cell OEM, right? We are starting as a fuel cell OEM already. So the fuel cell, basically, if you just very simply classify, it's divided into three segments. There is this central fuel cell stack, right? That's where the reaction happens. Then there are process subsystems. That's the hydrogen side and the air side. These are lines and heat exchangers and humidifiers and all sort of things. Then there's the electrical subsystems, right? These are DC-DC converters and control systems and everything. So in the beginning, what we are looking at is that the stack is something that we will not produce ourselves, right? We will have the stack designed by ourselves, but then manufactured from our partners primarily in Europe, right? So we have some Dutch and German partners who would be supplying us the stack. However, all the other components, the process subsystems and the electrical subsystems, we would be designing, engineering, and manufacturing them ourselves in India itself, right? And primarily looking at all these subsystems which are optimized for the fuel cell application which we are kind of going to do, right? So that is the target. Stack it will be our design manufactured somewhere else. The rest will be done by ourselves. So we are at, let's say 1 year. We have been doing this for almost a year now, right? In the starting blocks. With time, we'll be backward integrating more and more and more, and perhaps a couple of years, 2-3 years down the line, we could pick up stack as well ourselves. But time will tell. Yeah.
Okay, and you are choosing this. So this is like a diesel generator, right? Where these things are going to go. It will be substituting diesel generator. So is that the easiest fuel cell to make? The auto fuel cells, etc., would be more complex.
You are right. You are right. I mean, absolutely. So you are actually, if you're looking at diesel generator, when you replace it with hydrogen fuel cells, so you replace that hardware with fuel cells, and you replace diesel as a fuel with hydrogen gas or hydrogen liquid, whatever you use, right? So, I mean, automotive fuel cells are. It's not like it is more difficult. I mean, in fact, let's say for certain applications, automotive is more easier to some extent compared to certain of the stationary power applications. But then where we see the challenge with automotive is that it is, let's say, the kind of applications which would come up are anywhere, let's say, trucks and above, right? So these are very large fuel cells. So the kind of investments you would need to get there is much higher, right? So that is like one of the things. But then we do believe that the problem of eliminating diesel gensets in India is much bigger, and we should look, because it solves a socio-economic problem as well, right? Like access to power. Whereas a truck is always a truck. I mean, of course, you're solving the decarbonization issue, but you're not looking at the access to power aspect. So that's why we chose for this, and we thought, we can start with that and focus on that. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. And lastly, where are you in your journey, and what is it looking like next 6 months down the line?
Yeah, so we are, as we speak, we are commissioning a project right now. Right, so the factory acceptance test of that fuel cell is ongoing currently. So as I said, this particular fuel cell is manufactured abroad on base of our design. So my co-founder Lakshmikant is there right now with the fact. That's a good thing. So maybe another 1 or 2 months, once it's shipped here, then it will be installed. What we are looking at in the next six months is to start setting up. We will be setting up a proper let's say a manufacturing facility where we can start scaling up the production in-house in India. That's going to be number one target, because we see a lot of projects coming up, a lot of demand coming up, not only in India but also globally. So we need that manufacturing set up properly, right, rather than just outsource manufacturing. The second thing which we'll be focusing is on increasing the scope of our backward integration, right? So there are certain parts which are already backward integrated. A lot of patents will be filed, but then we want to increase that more and more, so that let's say eventually it's going to be about costs, right? But more than cost, it's also going to be about indigenization and the design, which could be manufactured here locally and optimized. So that's where the focus is going to be, so that we can accelerate the, let's say, deployment of that in the market.
Yeah, initially it will just be about demonstration, I think, that it can work and it can work well. So.
Right, because the cost of hydrogen has to come down, cost of fuel cells has to come down. So, I mean, we should be ready when the hydrogen is ready, right? So we cannot, start then. It will be too late.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best and hope to see you soon.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Bharti. It was a pleasure chatting and having a discussion around hydrogen.
Yeah. Bye.